Forget everything you think you know about mobile games, because one of the most ambitious RPG projects of 2019 has just been released, and it's going to change everything. Raid: Shadow Legends is one of the most immersive experiences you'll have on a smartphone. The amazing storyline and awesome 3D graphics are just like something you would play on a PC or a console. There are a bunch of fun ways to play this RPG, including campaign, giant boss fights, and PvP battles. There are also hundreds of champions to collect and customize. The details and performance of this game is crazy. Just look at how much detail is on these champions. The best part? This game is absolutely free to download and play. Raid: Shadow Legends is exploding in popularity, and if you start playing now, you'll get a huge head start. Coming up soon, there's going to be a special launch tournament with crazy in-game prizes and real-life physical prize packs. Please don't forget to join my clan before that. Just search for Criminally Listers and hit me up. Below the video in the description box, you'll find a link to download Raid: Shadow Legends. If you download the game using that link, you'll be supporting this channel, and you'll get 50,000 silver and a free epic champion as part of the new player program, courtesy of the development team. So download Raid: Shadow Legends today, and I hope to see you in my clan very soon. Number 3. David Buller. In 2001, David Buller was a professor of fine arts at the University of Toronto. He had been a lecturer at the university for 15 years, and he was also an artist. His art was described as intertextual media. He mixed fine art and pop culture images. His friends said that his work was intimate, forceful, and relevant. Buller was openly gay, and one theme of his artwork was homoeroticism. Buller's office was on the second floor of a building called the Kavanaugh Building, and it was part of the main campus of the University of Toronto. The Kavanaugh Building was constructed in 1875, and it is located in the middle of a roundabout. The building is often described as maze-like, with hallways that lead to dead ends and other hallways. Buller's office was at the very back of the building, and it would have been very hard to find unless you knew it was there. At about 1 p.m. on January 18, 2001, Buller was seen getting onto an elevator in the Kavanaugh Building. The building was busy that day. On the main floor, just inside the main entrance, there was a retirement party. About 150 people attended the party. Buller was supposed to give a lecture at 6 o'clock that evening, but he didn't show up. The next morning, at about 6:30, a custodian went into Buller's office, and she found the 50-year-old professor's dead body on the floor. Buller had been stabbed 7 times, 6 times in the chest and once in the back left shoulder. It is thought that he was attacked from behind while he was working on his computer. The power cord to his desktop computer had been pulled from the wall, and it was wrapped around the base of his chair. The last keystroke was made at about 2:25 p.m., so it's suspected that he was attacked around then. What is really unusual about Buller's murder is that it happened in the middle of the day in a busy building, yet no one saw or heard anything unusual. There have been several theories regarding suspects. One theory is that his murder was just a random act of violence. Near the Kavanaugh Building, there was a homeless shelter, a psychiatric hospital, and a seedy hotel where people with unsavory histories were known to stay. It's thought that someone who was staying at one of these places walked into the Kavanaugh Building, wandered around till he or she found Buller's office, and then stabbed him to death. But the police and Buller's family do not think that this is what happened. They think the killer knew Buller, or at the very least, he or she was involved with the university. One reason they believe this is that there was a lot of people in the building at the time of the murder. This includes about 150 people who were at a retirement party on the main floor. If a drug-out homeless person was wandering around the building, someone would probably have noticed. But no one reported seeing anyone unusual in the building that day. Also, if the killer wasn't connected to the university and they just wanted to murder a random person, why pick such a busy building in the middle of the day while a party was going on? This would have been needlessly risky if they were trying to commit a random murder to satisfy their bloodlust. Also, Buller's office was at the back of the building and it was hard to find. If the murder was random, why did the killer walk all the way to the back of the building and risk being seen? Why not kill someone in an office closer to the entrance? One thing to note is that when someone is stabbed multiple times, it usually creates quite a mess. So there is a good chance that Buller's killer got blood on himself or herself. But no one saw a blood-splattered person in the building that day. Also, no traces of blood were found outside of Buller's office. Near Buller's office were washroom and art studios, which were all equipped with sinks. So the killer probably washed up after the murder. He or she may have even changed into a different set of clothes. This all suggests that the killer was familiar with the building. If the killer knew the layout of the building, they could have slipped into a nearby room with a sink within a few seconds, instead of wandering around splattered with blood, looking for some place to wash themselves. If the killer did bring a change of clothes, it is evidence that the murder was premeditated. The fact that the killer brought the murder weapon with them and took it with them after the murder also lends credence to the theory that it was a premeditated murder. Since there is evidence that the killer was familiar with the building, and there is evidence that the murder was premeditated, it is believed that the killer wasn't a stranger to Buller. One theory is a disgruntled student killed Buller. The police even had a specific student in mind. The student, whose name was never made public, had threatened several professors. One time, the student paced around the back of Buller's class with a knife. At the time of the murder, the student was in the process of dropping out. Then, not long after the murder, he moved out of the country. But the student had an alibi for the time of the murder, and the police were able to verify the alibi, so he was eliminated as a suspect. Also, it's thought that Buller was first attacked when his back was to the killer. It is possible that Buller was showing his killer something on his computer. This suggests that Buller was comfortable enough with his killer to turn his back to him or her. It does not seem likely that Buller would have turned his back to a student he thought would harm him. Another theory is that Buller was killed by a fellow faculty member. According to one of Buller's friends, at the time of his murder, he was having problems with two faculty members. However, the police have found no physical evidence that either faculty member was involved in the murder. A final theory is that Buller was killed because he was gay. One possibility is that he was a victim of a hate crime. But the police have found no evidence to back up this theory. Another possibility is that Buller lived some kind of risky lifestyle, and he was killed because of that. But his friends and family said that he did not live that type of lifestyle. Also, no evidence was found to suggest he lived a risky lifestyle. Buller's family was hoping that the case would be solved quickly. But 18 years later, the case remains unsolved and it's ice cold. Unfortunately, due to a lack of physical evidence, the murder of David Buller may never be solved. Number 2. Sigrid Stevenson. Sigrid Stevenson was born in January 1952 in Livermore, California. When she was a young child, she and her family moved to New Jersey because her father got a professorship at Princeton University. Stevenson was described as a free spirit. Notably, she hitchhiked across the United States by herself. In 1976, she started her master's degree in music at Trenton State College in Ewing, New Jersey. In the summer after her first year, Stevenson started renting a room from one of her professors and his family. In August 1977, just before she was going to start her second year of her master's program, Stevenson visited New England and Canada. She returned to Ewing on Saturday, September 3, 1977. When Stevenson went to the professor's home where she was renting the room, she found out that the professor and his family had gone on vacation and she was unable to get into her room. She decided to go sleep in the dressing room in the basement of Kendall Hall, which is on campus. She had previously spent a few nights in Kendall Hall. Stevenson's passion was the piano. Specifically, she loved to play Beethoven. She wanted to be a concert pianist, and if that didn't work out, she wanted to be a music teacher. Stevenson didn't have a piano of her own, so she practiced on the one in Kendall Hall. She was so dedicated to practicing the piano that she was known to sleep in the dressing room or under the stage in Kendall Hall. At about 11:30 p.m. on Sunday, September 4th, the day after Stevenson arrived back in Ewing, a campus security guard saw her bike chained to a bike rack outside of Kendall Hall. He unlocked the door and went inside Kendall Hall. He found a trail of blood on the floor. He followed the blood and it led to the stage. On the stage there was a piano with sheet music on it. The piano and sheet music were splattered with blood. The security guard found a piano dust cover on the floor with a large lump under it. Under the dust cover was the dead body of a nude woman lying in a pool of blood. The scarf was tied around her head. The scarf had most likely been used to gag her. Also, her wrists were tied behind her back. She had been beaten in the face and the head and in the chest. Her face was so severely damaged that she was unrecognizable. A professor who knew Sigrid Stevenson identified her body because he recognized her hair. An autopsy revealed what was evident from looking at her. She had died from blunt force trauma to the head and severe blood loss. She also had 2 broken ribs and she had bruises on her chest and one of her elbows. What was less obvious was what the killer used to beat her. The murder weapon wasn't found at the scene, so the police thought that the killer brought it with them. Another possibility is that the murder weapon was a 2x4 that was used to prop up the piano that was on stage. The 2x4 was missing after the murder. The medical examiner determined that Stevenson had not been sexually assaulted. Stevenson's friends had a possible explanation for why she was found naked. It turned out that Stevenson liked to practice the piano naked. The police found Stevenson's wallet near her body. It had $7 and several traveler's checks in it. So the police ruled out robbery as a motive. Without robbery and sexual assault as motives, the police were mystified as to why anyone would want to kill the 23-year-old music student. The police interviewed her friends and family, and they didn't think that she had a boyfriend, or any angry exes, or any spurned suitors. The police weren't even sure if Stevenson was targeted or if her murder was just a random act of violence. The last confirmed sighting of Sigrid Stevenson was on Saturday night, which is the night before her body was found. Kendall Hall has 2 auditoriums. Stevenson was killed in one of them. On Saturday night, there was a performance of a play in the other auditorium. There were 16 people in the cast and crew and about 30 people in the audience. Stevenson watched a bit of the play, and some of the cast talked to her after the show. Stevenson mentioned that she had been locked out of her room, and she planned on sleeping in the dressing room in the basement of the building. The last of the cast and crew left Kendall Hall at about 12:30 a.m. They said that when they left, all the doors to Kendall Hall were locked. The police found Stevenson's diary in the dressing room of Kendall Hall. Her last entry was written on Saturday night, nearly 24 hours before her body was found. She wrote that she heard the play's crew dismantling the set, and she was annoyed by the noise they were making. She needed to sleep because she wanted to practice in the morning. She wrote that she had to be out of the hall by 11 a.m. the next morning because she knew a security guard came by at that time to check the hall. Campus security guards had caught Stevenson in the hall when it was supposed to be locked and empty several times. It's not known if a security guard did check the hall at 11 a.m. or any other time that day. What is known is that at 11:30 on Sunday night, Stevenson was found dead on the stage. A friend of Stevenson said that he saw her at a movie theater on Sunday night, hours before she was killed. However, this sighting has never been verified. But it is possible that she was at the movie theater. Stevenson had to be out of the building by 11 a.m. on Sunday because a security guard was supposed to check the hall. If she left the hall on Sunday morning and she still couldn't get into her room, it's possible that she would have gone back to the hall to sleep there on Sunday night. If she had to kill time before she could go back to the hall, a movie theater would have been an excellent place to go. For a few dollars, she could have sat and relaxed for several hours. However, as previously mentioned, the police were never able to confirm that she was at the movie theater. The police have not made an estimated time of Stevenson's death public. The police thought that the killer was familiar with the music department, or at the very least, he or she was familiar with the campus. They thought that Stevenson was most likely killed by a campus security guard. One major piece of evidence that points towards the possibility that a security guard was the killer is the piano dust cover that was draped over her body. The dust cover didn't go with the piano that Stevenson was playing. Instead, the dust cover belonged to an expensive Mason & Hamel grand piano. The Mason & Hamel grand piano was in a locked room in Bray Hall, which was the music building on campus, and it was about 75 yards from Kendall Hall. It's believed that the killer went to Bray Hall, got into the room, and grabbed the piano cover. Then he or she put the cover over Stevenson's body. One theory as to why they did this is that they possibly wanted to use the piano cover to help move her body. But for some reason they decided not to move the body, or they simply couldn't because it was too heavy. At the time of the murder, Bray Hall was locked. The room which contained the piano in Bray Hall also had a working lock, and it had no windows. For someone to get into the room, they needed a key to get into Bray Hall, and then a second key to get into the room that contained the piano. Then a third key was most likely used to get into Kendall Hall, where Stevenson was murdered. At the time of the murder, not even the supervisor of the music graduate program, nor the director of the music program, had all 3 keys. Neither did the 2 custodians who were assigned to clean the halls. But the security guards did have all 3 keys. However, it's important to note that the lock on one of the doors to Kendall Hall was faulty. If someone pulled on the door hard enough, then the door would open. While the locks on the door at Bray Hall and the room where the piano cover was being held were newer, the keys were needed to open them. So at least 2 keys were needed to get the dust cover. Even in the unlikely event that all 3 doors were unlocked, the use of the dust cover still suggests that the killer was familiar with the campus. The killer left Kendall Hall, walked the 75 yards to Bray Hall, entered the room with the piano dust cover, picked up the piano dust cover, and then returned to Kendall Hall. Why would the killer bother leaving Kendall Hall unless he or she knew that there was a piano dust cover in Bray Hall? It would have made much more sense that they would have searched Kendall Hall for something blanket-like. The killer probably only went to Bray Hall because he or she knew that they could find the piano dust cover there. If the killer didn't know about the piano dust cover, it was an unnecessary risk to leave Kendall Hall to go search another building. He or she would have had no idea when a security guard might go check Kendall Hall or Bray Hall and catch them red-handed. At the very least, leaving Kendall Hall to search for the piano dust cover would have exposed him or her to being seen by anyone who might have been on campus. A security guard, on the other hand, would have probably been aware what his fellow security guards were doing at the time of the murder, so he may have felt more comfortable taking his time. Another possibility is that the killer opened the Kendall Hall door with a faulty lock, and the piano dust cover was already in Kendall Hall when the murder took place. But this still suggests that the killer was familiar with the campus because he or she probably knew about the faulty lock. Why would a person who is not familiar with the building pull hard on a locked door to a building that was clearly closed? The police interviewed all the campus security guards, the cast and crew of the play, and the audience members, but no one saw anything unusual, and they all had alibis for the time of the murder. The police have never publicly identified a suspect, and over 40 years later, the murder of 23-year-old Sigrid Stevenson is considered cold. Number 1. Theresa Allore. Theresa Allore was born in October 1959. When she was a teenager, she was described as free-spirited and adventurous. She loved to hike and rock climb. She even went skydiving. In the autumn of 1978, Theresa was 19 years old, and she was enrolled at the Champlain College Lennoxville, which is in Lennoxville, a borough of Sherbrooke, Quebec, Canada. Theresa lived in one of 2 dormitories that were next to each other, and they were about 9 miles from the campus. On Friday, November 3, 1978, Theresa attended her classes. She was supposed to catch a bus back to her residence at 6:15 p.m., but she missed the bus. The next bus was at 11 p.m. Many students who missed the bus hitchhiked back to the dorms. In fact, in the school student handbook, the school gave tips on how to hitchhike safely. At about 9 p.m. that night, one of Theresa's friends said she saw her in the dormitory that was next door to her own. Theresa's brother, Andre, lived in that dormitory. Andre was not in his dorm that night, but it's possible that Theresa went to the dormitory to visit him. Theresa asked her friend for a cigarette. That was the last confirmed sighting of Theresa. The college didn't take attendance, and since students were always coming and going from the dorms, No one noticed that Theresa was missing for about a week. Andre was the one who called his parents and told them that Theresa was missing. Her parents then called the police, but the police didn't do much. They didn't even form a search party to look around the dormitories. They assumed that Theresa had just run away. The college also didn't help out much. While Theresa was missing, the school continued to bill Theresa's parents for her tuition and board. Theresa's parents ended up hiring their own private investigator, but he couldn't figure out what happened to Theresa. Theresa's family went the entire winter without knowing where she was. Then on April 13th, 1979, about 5 months after Theresa went missing, a man was setting traps for muskrats on a country road a little more than half a mile south of Theresa's dormitory. Lying next to a creek, he saw what he thought was a mannequin. He got a closer look, and he realized it was the body of a young woman. The police were called, and the officer who arrived on scene knew that the man had found the body of Theresa Allore. She was only wearing her underwear and bra. Her clothes were nowhere to be found. She was also wearing her watch, earrings, and a ring. Her body was badly decomposed. The officer did a visual exam of the body, and he thought that there were strangulation marks on her neck. Theresa's body was sent to a local medical laboratory. An autopsy was performed, and the results were inconclusive. On the autopsy report, the medical examiner wrote that Theresa's death was a violent death of undetermined nature. He did not think she had been sexually assaulted. The police concluded that she may have been partying and doing drugs. She had some type of adverse reaction to the drugs, or she overdosed. Her friends then dumped her body so they wouldn't get in trouble. Another possibility was that she drank too much and wandered away from the dormitory. She had some type of accident and died. Another possibility is that Theresa took her own life. 10 days after Theresa's body was found, her wallet with several pieces of identification in it was found on the side of a country road in Lennoxville. It was found between the dormitory and the college campus. What was odd about the wallet was that it was in good shape for being outside for 5 months in the winter. The clothes that Theresa was wearing on the night that she went missing have never been found. About 300 feet from Theresa's body, a garbage bag with women's clothes inside of it was found. But the clothes did not belong to Theresa. On the same weekend that Theresa went missing, a pair of hunters found some women's clothes folded and resting neatly on a log in some woods near Austin, Quebec, which is about 35 miles away from where Theresa's body was found. They reported the finding to the police. An officer went to the woods, but he couldn't find the clothes. Besides her bra and underwear, the only piece of clothing they found was a scarf that Theresa was wearing on the night that she went missing. The scarf had been a gift from her mother. It was found on the same day as her body was found, in a cornfield not far from her body. It had been torn into 2 pieces. For years, Theresa's youngest brother, John, was haunted by his sister's death. He didn't think it made any sense. If his sister overdosed on drugs, why did her friends dump her body beside the creek? He understood trying to distance themselves from her body, but why hide it? Why not dump her at the hospital, or even on the lawn of the dormitory? Also, why would they take her clothes and wallet? Another problem with the drug overdose theory is that, according to the toxicology report, there were no traces of drugs in Theresa's body. John was 14 when his sister died. He got married, had 2 daughters, and in 2000, they bought a house in Durham, North Carolina. About 2 months after they moved into the house in Durham, the police and 2 forensic teams came to their home. They wanted to do a search of their home because the previous owner, Andrew Dazelle, was a suspect in the disappearance of a 35-year-old woman named Deborah Key. Key went missing on December 1st, 1997. She was last seen at a pool hall in the company of Dazelle. John gave the police permission to search his house, but the police didn't find anything of interest. The police continued to search for Key and any evidence that could link Dazelle to her disappearance. In 2004, Dazelle confessed to the police that he murdered Key. He said that after he killed her, he put her body in a dumpster. Dazelle was charged with second-degree murder, but that charge was eventually dropped because a judge ruled that his confession was inadmissible. In 2009, Dazelle was convicted of enticing a child for sexual activity, and he was sentenced to 26 years of prison. Deborah Key's body has never been found. When the police came to John Allore's house, it got him thinking about his sister. In March 2001, John got in contact with a woman he had dated when they were both in high school, Patricia Pearson. After high school, Pearson became a writer and a journalist. She often wrote about crime. John wanted Pearson to write an article about his sister's death. John and his family always thought that if Theresa did die of a drug overdose and her body was dumped by her friends, eventually, at least one of her friends would come forward and confess because they couldn't live with the guilt. But no one ever did. John was hoping that an article about Theresa's death would encourage someone to come forward. Pearson and John met in March 2002 in Sherbrooke to discuss the case. Pearson and John went to get information about Theresa's death from the police, but the police weren't willing to cooperate. The police also admitted that they threw out some key pieces of evidence, like the only clothing that Theresa was wearing when her body was found, her bra and her underwear. Pearson then began a 5-month investigation into the death of Theresa Allore. Pearson got in touch with an acquaintance, Dr. Kim Rossmo. Rossmo was the research director at Police Foundation, a criminological think tank based in Washington, D.C. Rossmo got his start in the world of criminology in 1978 when he joined the Vancouver Police Department as a civilian employee. 2 years later, he became a sworn officer. While he was an officer, he continued his education. He was the first police officer in Canada to achieve a doctorate in criminology. He was a pioneer in geographic profiling. Geographic profiling analyzes a series of crimes based on location to determine a probable area where the offender might be residing. In 1998, Rossmo thought that a serial killer was murdering sex workers who frequented Vancouver's downtown east side. Since 1971, about 40 women had disappeared from the area. Rossmo advised the Vancouver Police Department to create a task force to look into the disappearances of the women. At first, his superiors didn't take him seriously. Then in February 2002, 53-year-old pig farmer Robert Picton was arrested and charged with the murders of 2 sex workers. In the months that followed, Picton was charged with 25 more murders. But then in 2006, all but 21 of the murder charges were dropped. In December 2007, Picton was convicted of 6 counts of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to 25 years to life without the chance of parole for 25 years. It's believed that Robert Picton possibly killed 49 women, but some people think that his real victim count is 60. Rossmo told Pearson that Theresa's death seemed like a sex murder. Pearson pointed out that there was no evidence that Theresa had been raped. Rossmo said that the killer could have used a condom. Or it's possible that his deviation did not involve intercourse. For example, he may have forced Theresa to perform oral sex on him. Pearson thought that this was interesting because of something that was written in the autopsy report. Before Theresa died, she had not thrown up, but vomit was found in her throat. This suggests that something may have made her gag. One problem with the theory that Theresa was murdered was that Theresa was seen alive at the dormitory that neighbored her own at about 9 p.m. on the night she went missing. So if she was murdered, she was either killed at or around one of the dormitories and her body was moved, or she was kidnapped and killed elsewhere. But how could either be done without anyone noticing? Friday nights at the dormitories were pretty busy with students coming and going from their dorms. There was also a night watchman patrolling the area. Pearson came up with a possible explanation. Theresa smoked cigarettes, and the last person to see her at the dormitory said that Theresa bummed the smoke from her. Theresa was known to buy cigarettes from a restaurant that was about a quarter of a mile from her dormitory. She may have been hitchhiking and she was picked up by her killer, or she may have been walking and her killer offered her a ride. Or as she was walking, her killer grabbed her and forced her to get into his car. After some investigating, Pearson and John began to suspect that Theresa may not have been the killer's only victim. 9 months before Theresa went missing, 10-year-old Manon Dubé and her 8-year-old sister, Chantal, were out playing with friends not far from their home in Sherbrooke, Quebec. When they were walking home, Chantal was cold, so she walked ahead. She arrived home safely, but Manon did not make it home. She had vanished within 500 yards of her house. Her body was found nearly 2 months later. Her body was lying face down in a creek about 6 miles from where Theresa's body had been dumped. Manon only had one noticeable injury, a superficial cut on her forehead. Even though there was no physical evidence to back up the theory, the police thought that someone hit Manon with their car. They panicked, and they loaded her body into their car. Then they dumped her body in the creek. Pearson talked about Manon's case with Kim Rossmo, and he said that he doubted that someone accidentally killed her with their car. Rossmo explained to her a criminology principle called the least effort principle. The principle is, in most cases, people will put the least amount of effort they can into a crime. For example, if a person runs down someone with their car, they usually just flee the scene. They don't stop, pick up the body, load it into their car, drive around looking for a place to hide the body, and then dump the body. That would be considered the most effort. So Rossmo thought that it was more likely that Manon was kidnapped and murdered. The police didn't see similarities between Manon's and Theresa's deaths, but John Allore and Patricia Pearson did. Both Manon and Theresa went missing on a Friday night. Neither bodies had much in the way of trauma, and in both cases, the cause of death was undetermined. Both were also found lying face down in or near a creek. Maynard's body and Theresa's body were dumped about 6 miles apart from each other. Something else they found interesting is that Theresa's wallet was dumped about 4 miles from where Maynard was kidnapped. If you were to drive from the area where Theresa's body was found to the intersection where Maynard was last seen alive, you would drive by the cornfield where Theresa's wallet was found. The man who owned the cornfield and found the wallet had a disturbing story to tell Pearson and John. The man has a daughter, and in the fall of 1978, she was 18 years old. Like Theresa, his daughter was a petite brunette with brown eyes. On October 3, 1978, a month before Theresa was killed, the man's daughter was walking her dog on the road that was next to the cornfield where the wallet was found. There was also an orchard next to the road. As she neared the orchard, a man drove up behind her and stopped his car. He jumped out of his car and started running at her. The young woman knew she was in danger, so she ran into the orchard. The man started to follow her into the orchard. Then a police car happened to pull up near the man's car, and the officer thought that the scene looked odd. The officer didn't see the young woman, but he did see the man who jumped from the car, and he thought he was acting bizarrely. He was arrested and he was brought to the police station. The next morning, the young woman contacted the police and told them what happened. The police told her that they had released the man because they didn't think he had committed a crime. They didn't know he had chased her. The police told her that the man had a criminal record. He had been convicted of several sex crimes in Manitoba. Unfortunately, the man who found Theresa's wallet and his daughter, who was nearly attacked, couldn't remember the man's name. If the police record the man's name, those records have been lost. A month after the attempted attack, Theresa went missing. After Theresa disappeared, her parents hired a private investigator. Pearson and John got in contact with the private investigator. The private investigator sent them a newspaper clipping about a murder that happened in Sherbrooke a year before Maynard was killed and 19 months before Theresa went missing. In early 1977, Louise Cameron was 20 years old, and she worked in the archives at a hospital in Sherbrooke. She was planning her wedding, which was to happen that May. On the evening of March 23, 1977, Cameron went to a convenience store that was about 2 blocks from her home. The store was a little more than 2 miles from where Maynard was last seen alive. After Cameron left the variety store, she disappeared. Her nude body was found 2 days later beside a country road near Austin, Quebec. Lying beside her body was her jacket and her pants. Her blouse and her purse were missing, and they have never been found. Wrapped around her neck was a bootlace from a military boot. The medical examiner determined that Cameron had been sexually assaulted and strangled to death. Pearson saw a possible connection to Theresa's murder based on where Cameron's body was found. On the same weekend that Theresa went missing, a pair of hunters found some women's clothes in a forest outside of Austin, just a short distance from where Cameron's body was found. However, the police never found the clothing, so it's not known if the clothing belonged to Theresa. In the span of 19 months, 2 young women and a 10-year-old girl from the Sherbrooke area died unnatural deaths, and all their bodies were found beside country roads. All three were petite, had brown hair, and dark eyes. Pearson discussed the three cases with Kim Rosmo, the man who pioneered geographical profiling, and he thought that the three deaths were connected. After her 5-month investigation, Pearson handed over the results of her investigation to the police. In the summer of 2002, her story was published in 3 parts in the newspaper, the National Post. After the story was published, John Allore campaigned for the creation of a cold case task force in Quebec. In 2004, the Quebec Provincial Police formed a cold case task force, and they assigned 5 detectives to it. In August 2018, they announced that they were expanding the task force to 30 members. They plan to examine 750 cold cases going back 50 years. John Allore maintains the website Who Killed Theresa, and he hosts a podcast of the same name. In the years since he started the website, he has found 12 other unsolved murders that may be connected to the murders of his sister, Manon Dubé, and Louise Camiron. The first murder happened on Saturday, March 29, 1975, about 3.5 years before Theresa was killed. 16-year-old Sharon Pryor left her family's home in Montreal to meet up with her friends at a pizzeria 6 blocks from her house. Sadly, she didn't make it there. Her body was found 3 days later, about 11 miles from her home, in a field in Longueuil, which is a city across the St. Lawrence River from Montreal. Her skull had been fractured, and her jaw was broken. It appeared that the killer only used his fists to beat her. He quite possibly had a ring on one of his fingers. Blunt force trauma to the head was the probable cause of death. Sharon may have been alive when she was dumped. On Tuesday, April 22, 1975, just 3 weeks after Sharon's murder, the body of 30-year-old Lise Choquette was found at a construction site in Laval, Quebec. She was naked, and her clothes were found about 200 feet away from her body. Her jewelry and her identification were missing, and they have never been found. She had been sexually assaulted, beaten, and strangled. A man's tie was tied around her neck. Nearly 2 years later, on Friday, March 25, 1977, Louise Camiron was killed in Sherbrooke. A month after that, on Saturday, April 2, 1977, the dead body of Joanne Lemieux was found in a field in Longueuil. Her body was found in the same field that Sharon Pryor's body was found in 2 years earlier. Not much is known about Lemieux's case. What is known is that she was sexually assaulted and murdered. 11 days later, on Wednesday, April 13, 1977, Jocelyn Houle went out for drinks at a bar with a group of friends in Montreal. Houle and her friends then left the bar to go to a different bar. As they were walking, Houle became separated from the group. She was seen walking with 2 men. She never arrived at the second bar. Her body was found in a ditch 3 days later near the small town of St. Calixte, Quebec. She had been sexually assaulted, struck in the head, and strangled. Like many of the other victims, Houle was a petite brunette with brown eyes. 4 months later, on Wednesday, July 27, 1977, 17-year-old Chantal Tremblay got on a bus not far from her home in Rose-Marie, Quebec. She was supposed to meet her sister at a bus station in downtown Montreal. However, she never reached the bus station. The bus driver said he remembers seeing her get off the bus at a different bus station about 6 miles away from the downtown Montreal bus station. In April 1979, nearly 2 years after Chantal disappeared, her skeletal remains were found in some woods, about 12 miles away from the bus station where she was last seen. Her clothes were found a few hundred feet away from her remains. If the medical examiner was able to determine the cause of death, it was not made public. On Friday, July 29, 1977, 2 days after 17-year-old Chantal Tremblay disappeared, another 17-year-old went missing. 17-year-old Joanne Dorian worked as a medical secretary. She left work at 11:45 p.m. on July 29th, and she caught a bus home. The bus driver saw her get off the bus at a stop about 2 blocks from her home in Laval. 10 days later, her body was found in between a gravel road and a river about 8 blocks from the bus stop. She had been stabbed multiple times in the stomach. Her body had decomposed too much to determine if she had been sexually assaulted. Nearly a month and a half later, on the night of Saturday, September 10, 1977, 18-year-old Elaine Monas went out to a restaurant with a friend. They parted ways and Monas walked home alone. Unfortunately, Monas never made it home. Her body was found in a park near a canal the next day. She had been beaten, strangled, and possibly sexually assaulted. On Tuesday, September 20th, 1977, just 10 days after Monas was killed, 33-year-old Catherine Hawkes left the office where she worked in downtown Montreal. She took a bus to her apartment, which was in a neighborhood in North Montreal. But sadly, she never made it home. Her nearly nude body was found the next evening in a vacant lot not far from her bus stop. Her head had been beaten. Hawkes died from a combination of head injuries and exposure to the cold. A month later, on Saturday, October 22, 1977, 23-year-old Denise Bazinet, who lived in East Montreal, went out for drinks with her friends. She didn't come home that night, and her family didn't find that unusual. But as Sunday dragged on and they didn't hear from her, they began to worry. They even reported her missing to the police. On that Sunday night, Bazinet was actually out with friends, but her family was right to worry. The next morning, her body was found beside a road near Carignan, Quebec, about 20 miles away from where she was last seen. The last time Bazinet was seen alive was at a bar about 10 blocks from her home. She was seen in the company of a man, and this is a sketch of the man. About 6 months later, on Friday, March 24th, 1978, Manon Dubé was killed. A little more than 2 months after Manon's murder, on the night of Saturday, June 3, 1978, 17-year-old Lisanne Blais went out with some friends to some clubs in Montreal. She left the last club to walk home at 3:25 a.m. The next morning, at about 9 a.m., Lisanne's nearly nude body was found behind her family's home. She had been strangled and beaten in the head with a brick. 5 months later, on Friday, November 3, 1978, Theresa Allore was killed. On Friday, August 3, 1979, about 10 months after Theresa was killed, 31-year-old Nicole Gaudreau was found dead in a field in Montreal. She was nearly nude. She had been strangled and beaten in the head. After Gaudreau was killed, the murders of young women in southern Quebec seemingly came to an end. Then nearly 2 years later, there was another murder that might be connected to the other 14. On Thursday, March 12, 1981, 12-year-old Tammy Leakey was sent to the store by her mother. Tammy, her sister, and her mother were visiting her mother's friend in Le Sud-Ouest, a Montreal borough. Tammy did not return from the store, so her mother and her mother's friend began to search for her. Someone happened upon Tammy about an hour and a half after she went missing. She was lying face down in an industrial park about 10 miles from where she was last seen. She was rushed to the hospital, but sadly, she was pronounced dead on arrival. John Allore said that all 15 cases, including his sister's, may not be connected, but he said it's possible. John now focuses on cold cases that may be unsolved because of failures in the Quebec justice system. In 2018, to honor his work as a victim's advocate, John was awarded the Senate of Canada's Sesquicentennial Medal. The award recognizes John's valuable service to the nation. John is hoping that one day he'll get closure regarding the murder of his sister, Theresa Allore. Thanks a lot for watching today's video. Hopefully you found it interesting. If you did, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe for more videos just like it. Also, please go to criminalist.com where you can suggest cases, buy merch, and find out about an exclusive podcast. But that's all for today. Thanks again for watching.